that protect against two things: forgetting tasks and being late on tasks. So any kind of organizational system that you have, if you've got ADHD, should protect against these two outcomes, is being late and forgetting, right? So stuff should be on time and it shouldn't be forgotten. So if you're struggling with ADHD paralysis, the first thing to kind of think about is think a little bit critically about whether this is the same as procrastination. Because in my experience, procrastination is putting off a task purposefully because you're avoiding something about the task. Either you're perfectionistic or there's some kind of emotion associated with it. Whereas ADHD paralysis is actually a sequencing problem. It's not that you're putting off the other 8 tasks because they're challenging in some way. It's that your brain is stuck on one task, and since that's occupying so much of your RAM, you can't shift to something else. So those are actually two very different things, and what I tend to find in people who associate ADHD with procrastination is that they're trying to solve the wrong thing, which is why their solutions don't work and they continue being stuck in ADHD paralysis. Does that make sense? Download more RAM. Great point. So this, y'all are joking when I see drop me stuff is saying download more RAM, etc. Right? So Casvot Vax is saying download more RAM. Y'all are right that is a solution for a while. So this is also something to understand. You know what the download more RAM is the equivalent of in kids with ADHD is a high IQ. So this is what happens with kids with ADHD. They start to struggle in adulthood, especially the ones that are actually above average intelligence. Because what they do is they muscle their way through things using brute force extra resources. So imagine, for example, like I'm using a word processor and I can't save my documents. So what I'm going to do is put RAM into my computer so I can have more documents open at the same time, right? So you're like literally investing more resources in an inefficient process, which is exactly what happens with smart kids with ADHD. They just brute force use intelligence. I can't pay attention to class. So what I have to do is use cognitive reasoning, inductive reasoning, deductive reasoning to answer questions. When the teacher calls on me, I want y'all to really think about this. If you're a kid with ADHD, when the teacher calls on you and you're not paying attention, the miraculous thing is that a lot of ADHD kids know the right answer anyway, even though they're not paying attention. And how do they know the right answer? Because they look around, they're like, oh crap, the teacher called on me. They look around, they look at what's on the board. Oh, we're doing math class. I see a problem on the board. They're asking me a question. Let me figure out what the answer is. This is the answer, and you say it in 5 seconds. And the teacher's like, okay, I guess you were paying attention. No, you weren't paying attention. You were brute forcing things with extra IQ. This is actually what's really, really sad about kids with ADHD, is that as they download more and more RAM, they fill up all of their, motherboard slots with RAM to try to compensate for not being able to save documents. The problem is at some point your motherboard fills up. And as your motherboard fills up and you can't brute force it anymore, you're stuck with all of this RAM and the inability to save documents. So this usually happens in adulthood for kids who are very, very intelligent and have ADHD. And they hit a wall because suddenly you can't pack any more RAM, right? Like you hit this really hard wall, and that's what's actually really devastating. Because this entire time, sometimes they'll even get IQ tested, right? You'll take this 5-year-old kid with like very high expectation parents, and they'll get them IQ tested at the age of 5. Oh, the child is gifted. Your child has an IQ of 140, a bunch of expectation, extra classes, AP classes, gifted and talented classes, and the kid is struggling, because they have no hard drive. They've got no hard drive. And they're just packing in RAM. And so their life becomes harder and harder and harder. But actually, because they're so exceptional, they can manage it up until a point. But at some point, you got to have a hard drive. You got to have disk space. You can't store everything in RAM. And that's what they run into. It's a hard stop for these people. It's so challenging. Make sense?